we are sitting here with Ambassador Nancy Stetson, and we're going to discuss Habitat 3, the new urban agenda, and food security issues. Ambassador Stetson, can you tell me a little bit more about your involvement with Habitat 3?
Oh, happily. I would love to tell you. For the last 2.5 years, I've actually served as the special representative for global food security. And one of the key issues of food security, which frankly the global food security community hadn't looked at, is what's happening to people in cities. As we know, the demographic statistics show us that people are moving from rural areas to cities, and even if they're not moving, city populations are getting bigger. We have hunger and malnutrition in cities. To be honest, we really don't know how much is there, and so we need to get good and better data on that, which I'm happy to say my office and the State Department is working on. But we know the problem is there. And the irony is that the global food security community does great work, but it has been largely focused on rural agricultural development, and for a lot of good reasons. The city community, people who work on sustainable urbanization in cities, think about a lot of services, electricity, water, transportation, but nobody was talking about food. So for the last couple of years or more, I have been out there saying, we need to expand our global food security efforts to think about what's happening in cities. We need more data. We need to find new ways to address it. And the people who do cities need to talk to food security people, and food security people need to talk to city people. So once I started talking about urbanization, I was asked to be also the special representative for Habitat 3.
And how have you brought together your interest in global food security and then your involvement in Habitat 3?
Well, lots of ways. First of all, every opportunity I had to throw a food security example in my public comments, I put it there. Secondly, in the negotiation process, we wanted to make sure that food security and food it was covered. And I would say food security, even though obviously that's a key interest for me in my office, food security isn't. It relates to so many things that happen in cities. It relates to it's not just food security; it's malnutrition in cities too, and that relates to transportation and water and hygiene. So really a lot of the basic city services that need to be established are also important to getting food security. So that's a couple of ways I've been doing it. And also we have been we're working on partnerships with other cities. For example, let me give you an example. We have cities that we're trying to connect with each other. And at this very conference, we are going to announce later this afternoon with C40, which is, as you know, the big global cities network, we are going to work together with them on trying to create a broader network dealing with food security and urbanization in developing country cities. So there's one example.
And the new urban agenda has a lot about recognizing cities proper, but also about the relationships between cities and the surrounding territories, hinterlands, and rural areas. Can you tell me a little bit more about how that plays into the issues that you have been working on over the past year or two?
It's really important. It's really important because we tend to think, I think everyone tends to think, well, here's the farm, here's the agricultural area, and here's the city. And as I said, the food security people kind of think of people in cities as being the market for the things that are produced in the agricultural areas. But of course, if you don't have a job and you have no income, you can't really buy anything at the market. So that's a little bit simplistic. But what I think we really need to do, particularly in developing countries where often cities that are beginning to grow are close to rural areas, is think of this as sort of on a rural-urban spectrum, and try to think of this area as an economic unit, and decision making needs to factor in what can help both sides, both those in the more rural areas and those in the city areas. And the thing is, if we do that, we can have better rules, better regulation, better investments, and investments that hopefully will provide, for example, off-farm income for farmers when they can't grow, and also provide jobs from the food system as well as other systems in cities for people who live in cities.
And as we move forward and implement the urban agenda, it's a rather holistic approach that it takes to sustainable urbanization. What would you say that some of the first initiatives should be?
On the whole agenda?
In relationship to these urban-rural partnerships and food security?
Well, I think one of the first initiatives is, I think we probably have to start. I think in developing countries it might be easier to start with those who work in cities, both mayors and local officials and other civic groups and experts who deal with cities there, because I think in some cases there are more decision-making structures for those areas than there are in extremely rural areas. I mean, let's face it, you go to some places in rural Africa, you have people that are kind of living far apart, and the decision, it's hard to exactly find out where the initial decision-making structure is. So I think that one of the first steps is trying to get cities in Africa that are dealing with this, maybe bigger cities, to begin to talk to smaller cities and help them solve problems, because ultimately this is problem solving. It's really helping officials in secondary cities to understand, here's the challenges we're going to have to face. Instead of trying to make it up on our own, let's see who's out there that can help us. So I think that probably in terms of the rural-urban spectrum, that's one place to begin. But the second thing I would say is another really important place to begin is with particularly private sector, because I think that the private sector can make investments in so many places along, in particular the food chain, but obviously in other systems within cities that will help to improve the food chain, but also provide those jobs that we're talking about. And when I say private sector, I believe that the private sector, I'm a pragmatist, so I want them to make investments that are good for promoting inequality, lack of inequality, promoting equality, good for promoting equality, good for promoting food security, but also good for cities and incomes, but also good for them. They need to make sense. But there's so many places. For example, refrigeration is one example where the private sector can kick in and make a huge difference in the system and provide jobs in the same way.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Stetson.